Guys, I hate to say it. I really do hate to say it, but that beautiful weld-in stainless taillight that I mounted in my sissy bar, I think I killed it. I think it's done, and I don't think it's coming back to life. I had high hopes that I could revive it, but those high hopes are out the window. So today we're going to be mounting a brand new taillight to this bike. I am very excited to show you guys this little creature that I am pretty sure was modeled after my Akita's face. It looks exactly like my dog, so much so that I just had to have it. So today we're going to be making a brand new mount for this taillight using this little plate of 16 gauge stainless steel. So the first step in this process is going to be for us to get this shape transferred onto our stainless plate. Now this obviously has a piece sticking out the back right here, and it's got a face on the front. So we can't exactly lay either one of these things on the plate. First thing we're going to do is take this lens out of the front of the taillight. Then we'll take the bulb out, and hopefully that'll let us sit this piece flat on this plate, trace around it with a marker, and get our shape rough cut. We've got the face taken apart, and now we are left with just our shape. So what we're going to do is take our shape, place it right here on our plate. I'm going to trace around this, and then I'm going to use an angle grinder to cut this plate to the dimensions of this actual taillight. And here we go. Now we've got the design drawn onto the back of here. Now you might be looking at this as a quick fabrication tip for you and wondering why did I off-center it down here. And that's because when you're cutting something like this with an angle grinder, it takes a long time to cut along these seams. So the closer you can put your design to the edge means I don't have to actually cut this distance or this distance. All right, now let me show you guys where we're at so far. So we've got our backing plate right here, and now we've got this piece made, which is the mount for that backing plate. So it's gonna sit just like this. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna drill out the two holes on the sides and then the hole in the center, and eventually we're gonna end up cutting a slot in the center. I'm just gonna get a quick center punch on all of these holes. There we go, all center punched. Now we're ready to start drilling. Now anytime you're drilling stainless, you want to make sure you're using some sort of cutting fluid. So I'm just going to put a little drop of cutting fluid on this bit, and then we're going to go ahead and get to drilling. We're just going to go ahead and buff these edges out. Now this right here is a very handy tool. This is a deburring tool. And the way this works is you just put this in the hole like that. Let's see if I can show you this here. You put this into the hole like this, and then you just stir it around, just like that. And it just cuts all the edges, the remaining edges off of the piece that you're working on. And that's it. You're good to go. So we've now got our 3 holes drilled in the plate, and we've got our backing plate over here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut a slot down the top of this so that this backing plate and this portion of it can drop down into that slot. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, it'd be difficult to make this rounded cut here at the bottom with something like an angle grinder. So what I'm going to do is use this hole saw to get the rounded cut drilled out at the base, and then once we've got that rounded section, we'll cut into the corners of it with the angle grinder. And there we go. So what you can see now, you can drop this part down there, and the holes slide right into each other. Everything fits up nice along the edges, but I do want to show you something, all right? These little bolts that come up out of this plate, they're not perfectly straight, and neither is this piece. As you can see, it's kind of cocked off to one side. So what I ended up having to do was kind of oval out these holes a little bit. You can see there, they're not perfectly circular anymore. And that's just kind of the way it goes when you're working with, this is not an expensive taillight, this is a $25 taillight. Sometimes you have to do a little finagling to get everything to work. Don't be sad, don't be ashamed if your holes are not perfect and you have to oval it out a little bit. These are not precision parts. You're not making Rolexes here. You want to make sure it's functional and that a bolt can hold this down, and that once it's snugged down, it's not going to go anywhere. And outside of that, you take what you can get. I got you guys brought in here. This is the area where I had envisioned this tail light mounting to. And what I was going to do was add another one of these 1/2-inch stainless steel arms straight up to the middle. What I didn't realize is that once you make this cut, there's not a lot of real estate right here. So I actually don't think that's going to be the way to mount this. This is also not centered to that, so it would kind of look off-centered as the mount came up. It would just look a little unfinished. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put two vertical strips that come down here and into the plate, down here and into the plate mount. So I said I wanted to make these strips out of something thicker than the plate mount. And right here I found this, this is a hanger bracket. I don't even know where I got this from, but it's clearly made out of stainless steel, probably some kind of hook. And anyways, you could see this is 1/8 inch, maybe even a little bigger than 1/8 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut two strips. I'll probably do one strip this size and then the other strip this size. So what I cut right there, you can see I've still got it hanging off. This was wide enough, this from here to here was wide enough that I felt like I could get two out of that. So I cut it down the center. Let me pull these apart. I cut it down the center and then I just sliced off the end here. So what I've got now, and just break these apart, are the two strips that I was telling you about. We're going to use these two strips, put a bend in them sideways, and then we're going to use these as the supports for the tail light bracket. So I was going to bring you guys over to the bender and show you how to just bend these up, but in the spirit of DIY here, I'm going to show you how you could do this if you didn't have a bender, because I know I go down the rabbit hole with certain things like TIG welding, and it can be very expensive, and people often write to me and they say, well, I can't afford a TIG welder. Is there another way that I can do it? So let's say you were doing this in your garage and you didn't have a bender. You could put these in a vise, and what you see, I've just marked the center line on this piece, right? Because I want, just for aesthetics, I want the piece to be equally on the tail light side and on the license plate side. So I marked out the center of the piece. I'm going to put it here in my vise, and we're just going to do this bend the old way, as I say it, because this is how I used to do all the bends. We've just got a ball peen here, and we're just going to give this thing a couple taps. We'll get it nice and tight, and we're just looking maybe 15 degrees on the angle, nothing crazy, right? So now you can see we've got a little gentle bend angle, and if you see that, it's not quite sitting at 90 degrees straight up and down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this thing a couple more taps, and there we have it. Now we're sitting 90 degrees straight up and down, and we're ready to make the second one to match the first one. Then we'll go ahead and start welding things together. Here's another down and dirty fabrication tip for you. If you're trying to do two bends like this, where you want them both to be the same angle, clamp both of them in the vise once you've got a good one. In our case, this back one here is the good one. And then hit this one and stop once it reaches the angle on your good piece. And there we go. All right, guys, so now you can see we've got our mount bracket pieces here and here. And I've gone ahead and I've taken the license plate off the other side because we're about to weld to the back side. We don't want to burn up the plate, but I just want to mention this quickly. You see I've still got these bolts in here. And the reason for that is because even though all last year I never took my license plate off the bike, you still want to make sure when you're fabricating something and adding to your motorcycle that you don't accidentally weld something in a way where now you can't get a wrench on this bolt, or you weld this over here, and if you were to slam it right up against this hole, and you're like, oh yeah, I can get the bolt through, yeah, but the nut can't turn. So always make sure that you're double checking that what you're about to do is not going to severely inconvenience you later on. All right guys, so we are now ready to weld. We're just gonna get a quick tack on both of these brackets, then we'll fit it up with the tail light, see how it looks, and if we like the way that everything's mounting, we'll go ahead and put some bigger welds. Remember, this is only holding up a tail light, so these, I'm gonna put probably little 1/4 inch strips of weld on them. You do not have to full weld it, and you do not want to full weld something like this because you're gonna distort this plate like crazy. This is a 16 gauge stainless plate. There's absolutely no reason to go crazy with the heat. So we've got 308 filler wire. This is 304 stainless steel, and we're gonna go ahead and get these things tacked on. See how quick that happened? You barely have the arc going at all. And I've actually got the pulse set up on this, so it's pulsing at like 30 pulses a second. And that's just to help dissipate some of the heat. I know this isn't a TIG welding video, but I'm trying to make it one. All right, let's get the other one. And again, that's it. That's all that you need to do. A quick little blast of the heat is enough for you to get these things tacked, and now we can dry fit it, and if we don't like it, you can pull that off with your hands. Super simple. Now we're gonna go ahead and get the actual plate for the backing plate for the tail light tacked up and see how we like the looks of that. And that's it. We are mounted. And here's our test fit. As you can see, we are right over the plate, straight up center to center. Everything's looking good. This chin of the cat does not quite cover anything on the plate, but it's perfect spot for this running light to shine down on the entire plate mount. So I'm super happy with how it looks. All that's left to do now is full weld it in there and then get it wired up. So what I'm doing right now is getting a tack on every corner of these brackets. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to make sure that nothing's gonna move as we start the process of full welding them. We're not gonna do a complete perimeter weld, but we are gonna put enough heat to it that I would be worried about things shifting if all the corners weren't tacked down. And this one, we're getting a little bit of a weld on just the bottoms. Now we've got all the corners done, and I'm just welding. You can probably see the heat building up right there. I'm welding the bottom of that bracket first, and then we'll go ahead and put a weld on the top and just kind of fill in where we see fit. Let me bring you guys in here. So here you can see we've got a weld on the top of both of these. We've got a tack here and here, and then we've got tacks here, and we've got a weld on the bottom here, which you can't quite see, as well as a weld on the bottom there. So what I think I'll do is just add a little bit to the inside here, a little bit inside here, and we're gonna leave that alone. That is more than enough structural integrity to hold the tail light. And there she is with the actual tail light mounted to it. Stoked with the way that it's looking. You can still see plenty of the running light down here on the plate area. And now we're just gonna go ahead and get it wired. So for that, I'm actually going to cannibalize the wiring off of that. That is my old tail light up there. I'm gonna cut those wires and I'm gonna run them to our new tail light. So where we're at right now, I took the old wires that were running up to our older tail light, and I've just got them snaked up this side of the frame, and they're coming up to right here. It's this red and green wire in my fingers. Here I've got the two wires from the tail light, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap them loosely around these terminals for right now, because right now we just wanna see, is this tail light gonna work? Is it going to work with the same wiring, with all the same setup? And if so, it'll just be a matter of plug and play in doing these terminals properly. So now I've got them loosely wound around the 2 wires. Again, there's only 2 wires on this tail light. It's self-grounding. And because this is hard welded to the sissy bar through the mount, we should have a good ground. So now I'll take it to the back of the bike and we'll see if it fires up. We will turn this key on. Do we have power? We do. So we have a running brake light. You can see down here, this is the plate light. You've got like a yellowish hue lighting down onto the plate. And now let's see if it's working with our brake pedal switch. Give this a few pumps. And it appears that it is. I'm looking at the camera and I can see a much brighter glow when I'm pressing this brake pedal. So that's our brake light. That's our running light. So we know that our wiring is good. Now we just need to do it properly. So guys, I am not a wiring guy per se. It's really not my strong suit. It's more of a means to an end for me, but this is what I've cooked up for how I want these to connect. You saw before I have the wires from the brake light coming across the bottom frame leg, and they come up right here. You can just sort of see them in frame. This is the wires coming from the battery, right? And what it does is it curlicues around this post here. It does a little loop there, and that's so that it takes the tension off of the top portion of the wires. I don't want this sagging down and pulling on the connector from the brake light. And in that same fashion, I have the wires from the brake light up here come down. They do a curlicue around this post up here. So what you've got is a little curlicue on either end, one on this post, one on this post, and then they're going to meet in the middle. And right here in the middle, there's going to be a connector connecting them to each other. And actually, while I've got you guys right here, I'll just show you what I'm going to be using. This is what I found in my little parts bin. These are basically a butt connector. So you put a wire in this end, a wire in this end, you crimp them in the middle, and then these, you heat shrink this down. You just put a lighter to it, and that'll heat shrink this little piece. So this is what we're going to be putting. I've got 2 of them. We're going to put one on each wire, and for the time being, that'll be this brake light wired up. And I brought you guys in even closer because I want to show you this here. First off, when you're using these connections like this, there's only so much wire that can fit into this connector, right? Because there's a hard stop in the middle of it. So when you're working with this stuff, you can see I've got one green end here. It's longer than the red. What we have to do is we have to trim the red down to the same height as the green, because right now it's excess length. For the record, I'm using these. These are a set of Klein electrician's pliers. I don't even know what you would call these things. Like Klein, these are made in the USA. Happy to buy from a company that is willing to make their tools here. So what I'm going to do, you can see I've got the curlicue removed so it's easier to work with and easier for me to show you guys. I'm just going to crimp these connectors on out here, and then we'll do the trickier one in there. So what you do is you slide that end in. Down here in the middle, we've got our crimpers. So we slide that end in there. I know you guys can't really see this too great, but I'm doing my best to get it in there for you. And there we go. We crimp that down onto the connector. And now, when you tug on this, you can't pull it off. We're going to do the same thing on the red one, and then we will go ahead, re-wrap the curlicue, and we'll connect it on this guy up here. One other thing that I forgot to mention, heat shrink tubing, right? Once you've actually crimped these on to both sides and you're ready to heat shrink these on, these ends are going to shrink down. So what I want to put over that is this heat shrink tubing so that you don't see this blue connector on the side of the bike. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece of this. I'm going to grab these lines here. I'm going to slide this tubing up onto that line and out of the way, heat shrink these down, and then after the heat shrink has shrunk, I'll bring this tubing down the line, place it over these blue terminals here, and then heat shrink this tubing down onto this so we have a nice finished look. Here we've got our 2 terminals crimped on. Now we're going to go ahead and heat shrink the tubing itself. I should use a lighter for this. Maybe you're supposed to use a more professional tool, but a lighter is what I have, and a lighter is what I'm going to use. And you can see that shrunk that way down now. This one here on the right, you can see that. And now we're going to go ahead and do the one on the left. And we're going to try not to get this black heat shrink caught up in this flame, because we are not ready to shrink the black stuff yet. So let's see if we can get that out of here. My whole curlicue design is making this a lot harder than this needed to be. That's the price you pay for cool stuff, right? All right, let's get this other one. And that is shrinking down nicely. Perfect, and now we will do the bottoms. There's our two terminals, and they are coated with the heat shrink. Now we're going to take the black heat shrink, slide this down, and we're going to shrink wrap this over top of the blue terminals. So you remember when I told you guys I was not a professional with wiring? Let me go ahead and show you what happened here. Unfortunately, the heat got to this heat shrink wrap before I could get it down over this one. The other one turned out just the way I was describing. So when I say this masks the blue, that's what it's supposed to look like on the left, and then this is what happened on the right. So what I'm going to end up doing is probably throwing some electrical tape to bind these two together, and no one will be the wiser, except for thousands of people on the internet that are like, this guy sucks. And this is it, guys. This is our finished product. So we've got our little wraparound down here, a wraparound up here. The two connectors are in here, and then I've just run some electrical tape around the sissy bar here to secure the connection. So nothing's going anywhere. I'm sure there's a cleaner way to do it, but like I said, happy to have somebody come on, educate me on the wiring. We could do a little DIY. I think we'd have some fun with that, but for the time being, this has given me a running brake light and tail light again, which I am super stoked about. Nothing left to do now but throw the plate back on and go for a rip. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you click the video up in the top right corner where I will show you how to weld in sight gauge bungs on your gas tank. Quick and easy fabrication tip that'll let you spice up your next build a little bit. Catch you guys next week.